50, 40, 30, 20, 10.
Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm a 737 pilot and a member of PMDG's tech team. In today's video I'm going to show you how we do single engine taxi in the Boeing 737NG, and I'm going to teach you some of the basic requirements for using single engine taxi. So let's start straight away. You guys saw me starting the timer up here as soon as I went back to idle reverse thrust. Now that is the very first thing we need to do, since we have a 3-minute cooldown allowance for our engines in order to be allowed to conduct single engine taxi. Now this is an allowance that only needs to be taken into consideration if you are actually going to do single engine taxi, and not if you are going to conduct a standard taxi to the gates where you are allowed to shut the engines down any earlier. However, for single engine taxi, we need to take this allowance into account. Once that cooling time has started, do not operate your engines above normal taxi thrust settings, which is less than 40% N1. Otherwise, your cooling cycle is interrupted. Even though, to be totally fair, we have to see this with a little grain of salt, as temporary usage of higher thrust levels is definitely permissible. But temporarily meaning only a couple of seconds in this station. So let's talk about another couple of basics for single engine taxi. Single engine taxi should be considered the default option for taxi and not something special. That means that for any landing where the weight is less than 63 tons, where there is no minimum equipment list restriction, and where we have nothing impacting the controllability of the aircraft on the ground, such as contaminated taxiways, single engine taxi is normally used. As already outlined earlier, we start the timer when we have reduced thrust to idle setting on the landing, and that includes idle reverse. And as we are approaching 3 minutes, we can then shut an engine down. Also required to be allowed to do single engine taxi is that we must have the after landing procedure completed, so make sure that you do that within those 3 minutes in order not to waste any fuel. Now, once the after landing procedure is complete and the aircraft is on an area that is not contaminated, we can then shut down engine number 2. The reason we prefer engine number 2 is because there are more important systems connected to hydraulic system A, which is powered by the left-hand engine on the ground. So, we passed 3 minutes, so we can now shut down engine number 2. The aircraft will taxi initially pretty much like what you're used to from doing taxi on 2 engines, which in this occasion means that it will keep rolling at approximately its previous taxi speed. However, all taxi speed restrictions still apply, and that means that in order to conduct turns we need to slow it down to 10 knots, and then we will need thrust again to accelerate. Now, that thrust is crucial. Do your very best to avoid the aircraft from stopping. If you stop the airplane, you are going to need a lot of thrust in order to get moving again. It is possible to turn either way in single engine taxi, so you can do both left and right hand turns, but you will see how it takes the aircraft a lot of time to accelerate. Remember when we increased our thrust? And just look what our speed is doing over here. To be totally fair, The real airplane does accelerate a tiny bit better on single engine taxi than the PMDG, but that is down to flight simulator limitations. It is not required to run the APU during single engine taxi in the 737, however on some other types, such as the A320, it is required, so be sure to be familiar with your aircraft. Especially when you're turning onto a stand that has a docking and guidance system, you need to very carefully manage your energy, especially as you're approaching very slow speeds. So we've just turned into the gate. Let's slow the airplane down to a decent speed for entering a gate, which is somewhere around 5 knots or less, but be sure that you don't lose too much speed. Some pilots just increase thrust a little bit when they are within the gate area, when they are taxiing in, but that is not required. So, we are almost parked, and as you can see, the airplane taxis perfectly fine on a single engine during taxi in. And here we are. So, welcome to Cologne-Bonn Airport. But before we disembark the aircraft, let's go over a couple of more items that I want to discuss for single-engine taxi. So, single-engine taxi for departing flights, so before takeoff, is not authorized in my airline. Therefore, I am not going to cover that topic in this video. Following landing, however, crews are encouraged to taxi in using single-engine taxi procedures. Single-engine taxi has the potential to save fuel and reduce carbon emissions, and as most ground operational equipment is pre-positioned on the right side of the aircraft, it is recommended to shut engine number 2 down while keeping the APU off and just starting it as close as possible prior to entering your stand, as we've just did. Now, during engine out taxi operations, the flight crew's attention should focus on taxiing the airplane. Taxi in is a critical phase of flight and sterile cockpit must be followed. The crew should consider their familiarity with the airport and the complexity of the taxi route before conducting single-engine taxi operations. Prior to shutting down an engine after landing, consideration should be given to the following non-exhaustive list. If single-engine taxi is not planned, then do discuss it in the briefing prior to landing. Otherwise, single-engine taxi should be the standard procedure. The after landing and taxi-in procedure must be complete. 3 minutes engine cooldown must be complete. You cannot use single-engine taxi in low visibility procedures or when you have freezing conditions or contamination present on the taxiway and aprons. The braking action has to be reported good or better. Actual gross weight is less than 63 tons, and that is something to take special care of when you are flying one of the larger 737s, such as the 800 and 900, where the landing weight can frequently exceed 63 tons. On the slower models, like the 600 and 700, your landing weight is almost guaranteed to be below that, so single-engine taxi will be done approximately on every flight. There must be no conflicting restrictions on the minimum equipment list, and single-engine taxi is not authorized with any system inoperative which impacts braking or steering capability. Taxiway and apron slope must accommodate use of minimum thrust on the remaining engine, which is typically less or equal than 40% N1, and no FOD hazard must exist en route or around the stand. The airplane systems must be configured and managed appropriately to maintain safety, redundancy, and optimized for passenger comfort. Now, talking about airplane systems, you might have seen me clicking away a couple of master cautions on the way in. Now, in the real aircraft, the first officer would of course call any of them out. And what you're going to get is going to be the following in this sequence. Initially, you will get to see this, the source of light on the number 2 side, which is where we shut the engine down. A few moments later, you are then going to get the drive 2 light showing, which is again going to cause a master caution elec. And finally, after a little bit of time, you will see an hydraulic engine number 2 low pressure warning popping up, since the number 2 engine is shut down and the hydraulic pump therefore not producing any pressure anymore. Also be aware, the PMDG has a slight issue there that you do see a Master Caution IRS for a short time as well, which however should vanish after the transfer of the power is complete. So those are the expected cautions that you are going to get. If you get anything on top of that, then it might be a good idea to reconsider what exactly is going on. Now, during taxi, avoid thrust levels in excess of 40% N1. Give due consideration to personnel and equipment near the aircraft that may be affected by the air blast associated with the increased thrust levels, particularly areas behind the aircraft. Use the thrust setting normally used for taxi operations, however be prepared for slow acceleration. When taxiing on a single engine, it may take twice as long for the aircraft to accelerate to a comparable taxi speed than when taxiing on two engines. Therefore, allow time for airplane response before increasing thrust. Should a situation arise where single-engine taxi thrust levels are clearly insufficient to maneuver the aircraft, consider restarting the second engine using a cross-bleed start procedure. If restarting an engine, the aircraft must be stopped and the parking brake set. This pretty much concludes our single-engine taxi tutorial. I hope that you have enjoyed this one, and if you did, then do like, comment and subscribe. And if you want to support the channel, you can now become a channel member, where you can get some exclusive access to new content before anyone else, and where you, as a first-class member, even get the ability to request new videos. However, if you don't want to become a member, you can still do a one-time donation through the Buy Me a Coffee link that you can find in the video description below. And until then, I would like to thank you very much for joining, hope that you have enjoyed this video, and I look forward to welcome you again on the next one, hopefully very soon.